Are you able to comment on the accuracy and your understanding of what's happening in China? Because there has been a lot of commentary that perhaps their numbers are um, being kept from the rest of the world.
Yeah, I mean, any statistics in China, whether it's coronavirus deaths or GDP growth, you take with a grain of salt.
Right.
Everything is very political there. And, all of them I look at not so much as a raw number, but as a trajectory or a trend or something. So when we've seen recently this trend falling down, this week they had a day with no deaths at all,
Mm-hmm.
first time. I think that's indicative of the way it's going, not actually the raw number. I think in the situation of China, we know for sure that the death toll is much higher than, or significantly higher than, the official number of like 3,500, because at the beginning they just weren't testing. So many people died without being, they had respiratory
Right.
symptoms and they were healthy beforehand and they died. And the real telltale sign for families I talked to of people who've had somebody, lost somebody to this, they said, the body was taken away immediately
Right.
by guys in hazmat suits and cremated that same day. So that for them is proof that it was coronavirus.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it was certainly bigger than the government has said. But whether it's like of a similar proportion to what's happening in Italy and Spain now, we'll just never know. I mean, the things we do know is that China tried to suppress this at the beginning, and for a long time they denied that this was happening, tried to keep it under wraps. They said it couldn't be transmitted between humans when they knew that it could, and then had to admit that. But also, like, really astonishingly, they knew that this virus was being passed between people in Wuhan, and they allowed 5 million people to leave the city in the lead up to the Chinese New Year festival at the end of January.
Right.
So, I mean, that's what I think a lot of people have found so difficult to understand. I mean, it is difficult to understand. Like, how could they knowingly allow 5 million potentially infected people just to like, go to all lengths of the country? So the Chinese government's really trying to do some rewriting of the narrative and
Yeah.
doing propaganda for itself now,
Yeah.
which is pretty easy inside China because they control the entire internet and there's very little independent media. Not so easy to do outside of China and with journalists like us who can try report things uncensored.
And you get the freedom to do that. I mean, you're working for the Washington Post, but you're in China. Can you
Mm-hmm.
say what you want as you like when you're working out of China?
Yes, yeah. I mean, not only can I, but I must.
Mm.
I must report what we understand to be the truth to the best of our ability. So, I mean, there's certainly, I'm not going to not write a story because it might annoy the government.
Right.
That's not my job. My job is to tell the truth as best I can. The bigger problem in China is just that it's like getting access to facts and getting access to people. So, even in the 2 years that I've been in Beijing, it's become so much harder just to talk to anybody at all because people are scared of contradicting the government or getting in trouble with the
Right.
government. Under the current leader, Xi Jinping, things have gotten much tougher. So this we encounter a lot where people don't want to talk. And getting like ordinary people don't want to talk, and
Right.
getting officials to talk is like impossible and pretty hopeless, frankly. They don't tell you anything remotely useful. But in the last few months in particular, maybe you or your listeners know that there's been this kind of war building between the United States and China, where China kicked out 3 Wall Street Journal correspondents. Then America imposed limits on Chinese correspondents, which led to 60 Chinese nationals leaving uh, the United States at very short notice. And then China retaliated by kicking out all Americans working for the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, and Washington Post, which means my colleague has had to leave China. And so I had already come to New Zealand at that time. So I don't have to leave because I'm a New Zealander.
Right.
But now I'm shut out of China because they've put in this foreigner ban since I've been home. So that is kind of a sign of how the Chinese government is trying to curtail our ability to work and to try to silence us however they can.
And sell their narrative as opposed to perhaps the 100% accurate narrative.
I don't think they think we're going to sell their narrative. but they want us to stop doing things like traveling to Xinjiang and writing about a million Uyghur Muslims who've been detained for re-education up there, and trying, yeah, going to Wuhan and saying, oh, look, the death toll is much higher than what the official statistics
Right,
say.
right,
They
right.
want to curb our ability to report independently.
I mean, looking at the pictures last night, I'm sure you saw them. I was watching One News. Wuhan. I mean, I think the first thing as Kiwis, we don't quite get the economies of scale. I mean, Wuhan
Yeah,
is a city of 11 million people, and we're like, what the, 2.5 times the size of our entire population. And
yeah,
looking at it on the news last night, I was like, that place looks amazing. I'd love to visit there. The light show and things are going on. Do you get the sense that that is genuinely the people of Wuhan going, we're free now and this is gone, or is that more of a show by the government to the rest of the world saying, look at us, or you can stop looking at us now because we've got our lights back on, so everything's fine.
yeah. That's the latter. This
Right.
is the government saying, we have fought this people's war against the coronavirus and we've triumphed. And so they are really trying to show this as a way that Wuhan overcame this tragedy. But in fact, from reporters who are on the ground in Wuhan for when it started opening up yesterday,
Mm-hmm.
the trauma in that city is really palpable. That people have been shut inside their apartment, like tiny apartments. I know of families like 4 people in a tiny apartment for 76 days.
Yeah.
I mean, how would you not go crazy and kill each other? So these people now can breathe out a little at least. But yeah, probably everybody's lost loved ones. Everyone's had a huge economic hit. People are still terrified going out into the street, and it's going to take a lot of time to get over this. And there's no real kind of mental health apparatus in China, or there's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of stigma around it and not much availability. So I think there's going to be a lot of kind of psychological damage to try to heal now.
And probably the big question is, if you do kill your mother-in-law because you're completely sick of being with her for 76 days, is that considered a coronavirus death, or is it not? I mean, that would be the other question. But